Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon,
Good
Shraddha.
afternoon.
So I want to welcome all of you here who are present in the webinar. We're here to have a conversation on urban management as a new career. Xavier School of Human Settlements, which is XAHS of Xavier University, Bhubaneswar, has initiated a series of very interesting and very informative conversations on urban management. So over the next few weeks, there are going to be several webinars which will be covering very important aspects on the urban sector. We will be inviting several experts from academia, practice, research, as well as students from the urban sector to come and speak with us on relevant topics. Today, we will be talking about urban management as a career. I am Professor Shraddha Kumar. I'm a faculty here at XAHS, and I can see a lot of participants are joining us now. So welcome you all again. We're in conversation here with Professor Kajri Mishra and Professor Tathagat Chatterjee. Professor Kajri Mishra is the Dean at XAHS. She has over 30 years of work experience in teaching and research and professional work in architecture, planning, urban and rural governance and development. Dr. Tathagat Chatterjee is a professor at XAHS. He has held senior managerial positions in various international consulting companies over the last 20 years and has now joined academia. So before I begin the session, let me just set out some guidelines. Our intention here is to give all the participants a holistic idea about the career prospects in urban management. I would encourage all the participants to ask questions and queries that they have related to the topic. I would, of course, request you to please type your questions in the Zoom chat. And I will try my level best that we accommodate those questions in our conversation. Also, our intention is to answer as many questions as possible. So our answers are going to be as crisp as possible. We will try to wrap up this entire session in 30 to 40 minutes. So I think now is a good time to begin since a lot of participants have joined in. If we talk about cities, cities have been there since Banaras, since Patliputra, since Athens. They've been running, they've been functioning for better or for worse. They have been serving a purpose. But with rapid urbanization in the last few decades, the entire approach towards studying cities and working in the urban sector has paced so quickly. And it has become so important, such a high priority today. Uh, I believe that a lot of our participants here in the webinar would be new to the urban sector. So before we start talking about the career prospects in urban management, I would request Kajri ma'am if she could just quickly tell us what is urban management.
Thank you, Shraddha. You've set a big task in front of me, but I'll try and be very pointed and crisp and wait for questions to elaborate. Uh, you see, as you rightly said, we've had cities for a long time, but what people in general who are definitely living in cities and think about the issues there uh, often don't realize is that cities are extremely complex phenomena. They are composed of so many systems and are public systems and populations who have minds of their own, who have choices of their own, and all of this intersects to produce what we live in. Now, obviously, to manage them in a way that we all end up with livable cities, with healthy and pleasant surroundings. It's been a effort since at least the last 200 years to put in professional inputs to make sure that these are cities are developing in very systematic ways. These are cities are far more complex than any organization, even multinationals, and even the smaller cities would have the same degree of complexity, if not size, than the larger cities. Now to manage them, and today we realize that with our COVID, we realize that one of the first things that we as people who live together need to think about is public health. And the first concern in cities is always public health. And that's how all the professional approaches to managing cities started, with thinking about what do you do with human waste? How do you get the water to them? How do you see that everybody has a house to live in? And one of the first professions to look at this in a systematic way was public health engineering, which soon became urban planning. But as cities have grown, and as you rightly said, the rate of urbanization today is far faster and more extensive than ever before, we now need different kinds of professional help to actually make sure that cities grow systematically. And one of the emerging areas, or one of the realizations that has sort of emerged with people who are thinking about what to do to make cities better places to live in, more less polluting, much more livable, more let's say socially rewarding cities. Uh, they realize that today we have planning as a profession which looks at cities, but no other professional domain really considers how they can intervene to improve cities. And one of the key professions which can intervene is management. And management is not just business management. Management as a field is far larger. It's management science, which could be applied as much to other domains as to business. But unfortunately, we've only focused on management, or largely focused on managing businesses. But the same management science can often be also, or very productively be used to manage cities. And that is how the field of urban management is slowly growing. It has become one of the most rapidly growing professional fields of our generation. And particularly in terms of application of management science, it is probably one of the more productive areas. Of course, management science has been applied to things like managing education, managing hospitals, managing tourism. So you have various kinds of management fields now which have emerged. But urban management, because of the complexity, has probably taken a little longer to emerge. But currently, that seems to be a very fast growing sunrise domain. So basically, to pull it all together, in sum, I would say urban management is a field where you apply management science to making sure that cities are run well and are made or run in ways that make it livable for the communities that live there, for the people that live.
So,
So
ma'am,
that's
this kind of clears the concept of what urban management as a field is. But if I ask Professor Tathagat, what would then be the role of a urban manager in a city? If you could tell us a little more about that.
Thank you, Shraddha. Um, I would take off from where Professor Kajri Mishra has given an excellent introduction about what is urban management. Now, urban manager is a new role in terms of its professional definition, although the functions of urban management had been in practice over a long period of time, but not in a very professional manner. So urban manager is a much more professionalization of the role of running the city. In many ways, the role of an urban manager complements that of an urban planner, and also to a large extent links up to the role of an IAS officer, who is usually a municipal commissioner. So an urban manager is somewhere sits between the role of an urban planner and that of a municipal commissioner. So the primary role of an urban manager that I see is to make the plans, the cities function. The urban planners make plans for the future of the city, but the implementation of the plan is a major domain of the role of the urban manager. The manager takes the plans are often not linked up with how they are going to be financed, how they are going to be operationalized, who is going to do what kind of the service, whether it is running of a water service. A planner plans for maybe a new extension of the city, but who is going to provide the bus services to that part of the city? But who is going to provide the water services? What contracts are appropriate? Whether it is appropriate to go for public-private partnerships. And now we are going more and more for public-private partnerships. So what would be the contracts of the public-private partnerships? So what is advantageous for a particular area? So urban managers' main job is to make this city function in a very, very efficient manner. But at the same time, as Professor Mishra has already pointed out, that urban managers function in a public domain. So unlike a business manager who is essentially looking for a corporate profit, the role of an urban manager is to look after the larger benefits of the people in the city. So the urban manager takes a public view. So what is essentially good for the larger people of the city? What makes the city function not just efficiently, but in a much more just, much more sustainable, and much more livable and inclusive manner. So it is not just about the profit, it is but about the inclusivity and the justness and the sustainability as well.
Okay. Ma'am, I will come to you on this. Just 1 second. I think we need some clarification here because if we look at functioning of a city, there are so many proposals, so many decisions at every level. And there are so many professionals from different backgrounds who are all working hand in hand. For all the way from conceptualization to proposing to taking decisions and executing. So if you could just take an opportunity to tell where an urban manager in terms of roles and scope of work is different from urban planner or urban designer. If ma'am, you could speak about that.
Yeah, thanks, Shraddha. That's exactly where I wanted to just come in. I think Professor Chatterjee has summarized so well about the role of a urban manager. If I were to put it again, repeating it in a nutshell, I would say in terms of implementing whatever policy or plan is made either by the administrators, policymakers, or by the planners, that is where the role of an urban manager comes in. And in the spectrum of professional inputs that are required for a good city, which could include everyone from a public manager, which is a public administrator, all our officers, the entire governance framework, to planners, public health officials, community organizers, all kinds of professionals who are required. Uh, the urban manager becomes a generalist who is able to draw together and coordinate the implementation of whatever is planned to be done. As management science is about coordination, is about operations, is about finding the resources and allocating the resources appropriately in implementing projects. Now, a planner thinks about the future. How do you get to do something? And recommends it to the policymakers and decision makers in a democratic society. And they make the decisions about how to go ahead. Now, once the decision is made, somebody has to roll it out. It has to get projectized. And that is where the manager comes in. And management, as I said, is a generalist science. And it is about drawing together all these various functional areas, the money, the timelines, the people, HR, the resources, everything together, and ensuring that the project unfolds in the way that it should. One of the key issues here which may not as much be applicable in a business management context, is the policy and the legal framework. Because you're working in a public domain, the contracts, for example, or the even deciding on how to unfold a project or how to roll out a project when there are many stakeholders and at various levels included. So those are the special skills that a urban manager would bring. And that is the niche that is currently almost missing. And here I'd like to elaborate why I say it is missing. It is not that it doesn't happen. Well, cities are still getting managed.
Yeah.
Poorly, well.
Yeah.
However, some cities are well managed, some are poorly managed, but somebody is doing the job. The thing is that the people doing the job often are not systematically trained to do the job. Like today, for example, I would take the example of COVID and say, well, we are rolling out ways in which to control the pandemic. But in our country, we have a dearth of, for example, epidemiologists. If you watch the TV coverage of and the experts they call for discussion, is doctors in general. But when it comes to public health and epidemics and pandemics, epidemiologists play a huge role. Where are the public health specialists or epidemiologists in the country who could be brought in? In a similar way, we have a kind of a vacuum in terms of trained people who understand the complexity of cities and are therefore able to roll out projects in a way, let's say, an optimal way that brings in least unintended consequences. Because in a very complex situation, unintended consequences are always happening. And how do you minimize them? And the other facet of having the current way of doing things, which is the public administrators and officers rolling it out, is that they are administrators who actually are able to move from sector to sector, and therefore developing a competence and understanding of the depth and width necessary is not always possible. There are people who are very brilliant in doing it, who have learned on the job, but you have a whole profession which exists in the world. We don't have it in India. So that is the niche that an urban manager today would fill. I hope this is what you wanted
yes,
to
hear. Yes. There is a question which I'm getting privately here, which says that who could pursue urban management? Probably I can answer this question. People from architecture background, people from planning background, bachelors in planning, bachelor's, BSc, BA in geography, economics, people from engineering background, or students with a bachelor's degree, even students with LLB are eligible to become or to pursue urban management as a career option. So that was a quick question that I got from one of the participants. Because
Shraddha,
the main...
if I may add here, that the largest volume of people currently who are engaging in urban management are actually engineers. So while a wide array of professionals or undergraduates can get into urban management, today it happens that the market seems to look for engineers and architects and planners a lot more. But the potential for people, for example, law, we've had tremendous response from people looking for people with law background who understand cities, because the entire legal aspect, as I was explaining before. So BBA, BCom, geography, economics, law, all of them are also eligible. As I explained, cities are extremely complex and every facet needs to be looked at. I would also say people with social work background who would look at livelihoods and livelihood development, who would look at community development, they are also equally necessary. So I would say almost all the professions or almost all background people can actually productively contribute to urban management. And, you know, with a additional training in that, they would be very competent to contribute.
True. because the entire intention of the webinar was to try and focus on the career potentials in urban management. And I am getting a lot of questions on with respect to the same theme. We'll jump into that. If we There are a lot of sectors. Which kind of potential sectors can an urban manager really make a career in? Now, if we actually look at a small example of a house in the context of a city, we can't look at it in isolation. There are so many sectors which are actually involved in it. Be it, where does the waste generated from the house really go? How do you reach the house? That transportation aspect, or the livelihood to actually sustain the household, or even the kind of resilience that the house needs to have in a situation like this or any other situation that we do not foresee. So we see that there are so many urban sectors which are interlinked to one another, and they actually, city itself is so interdisciplinary. So obviously one of the questions is that what can be those potential sectors where an urban manager can make a career? If Professor Tathagat Chatterjee could please speak on that.
Yeah. Um, See, as you have also explained, and Professor Kajal Mishra has already explained, um, the domain of the city is really very huge. And in fact, all sorts of professional backgrounds has got links to the city in some form or other. Hmm. Um, so now coming specifically to the area where an urban manager can look for work. So the work of an urban manager it again encompasses very diverse fields within the broad urban space. They can work in the area of urban environment, because now we are facing this issue of COVID challenge. So that is the first issue that comes to my mind. They can work in the area of climate change and disaster management. That is one of the most critical areas where they can work. They can work in the area of urban mobility, about metro rails, provision of bus rapid transits, contracts for development of new transportation systems. They can work in the area of water supply and sanitation. So that is again one of the very fundamental areas where the government of India is now putting a lot of emphasis by building Swachh Bharat missions and Amrut missions, and several other schemes are linked to cleaning up how our cities are, and improving the infrastructure areas. Another very basic area which you have mentioned is that, Shraddha, you have mentioned, that is about the livelihoods. So, urban managers work on the area of improving livelihood opportunities for the cities, for the people in the city, because at the end of the day, people come to the city for looking for jobs. So, about the economic growth prospects of the city, and also we have to also understand that we are increasingly living in a globalized world, and the big cities are fighting with each other to attract investments. So the urban managers also work in the area of city marketing and city branding. Then comes to the issue of finance. So the MBA urban management degree empowers a student also to have a very deep understanding about the economic and the financial aspects of running the city. Then now every city needs to have its own financial support apart from getting government grants. So the urban managers work on improving the financial context of the city in the area of raising municipal bonds, infrastructure finance, climate finance, etc. Then one of the very fundamental areas where urban managers need to work for is the area of providing shelter, because that is one of the very basic needs of the city. So urban managers work in for the real estate companies, they also work for providing access for the housing, for the lower income groups to middle income groups to different affordability levels. So they work in the area of housing and housing finance. And another area which is very much opening up nowadays, as we have seen from our own experience in Xavier University's MBA Urban Management course, that is the importance of the urban data analytics. So now there is a lot of emphasis on mapping and GIS, drone survey, as we are seeing in the case of in COVID. There are the slum surveys that are going on, and in the area of artificial intelligence and blockchains. So that makes it also very suitable for people with information technology background. So urban managers can work in very diverse field. They can work for NGOs, they can work for governments, they can work for consulting firms. So their work range is really very, very diverse.
Okay. Ma'am, there is an interesting question here. One of the participants is asking that urban managers sort of bridge the gap between the private and the public sector. Do urban managers also carry out that role?
I would say, of course. First, let me explain a little bit. You see, who the hospital, but actually working for the patient's benefit. They have a Hippocratic oath that ensures that the patient's well-being is at the primary concern of the doctor. So similarly, anybody who is a professional, a real true professional, actually works for public benefit. So in that sense, we work for public benefit and public good, but our salaries may be paid by anybody. We may be employed by a consultant who is consulting for government or for a large company. We may be employed by a private company, a large real estate company, for example. Of course, we will deliver on what is our responsibility, but keeping in mind the larger public good. So yes, it's a very good way to put it that we are a bridge between the public and the private. But overall, I think our allegiance in some way or our larger public professional purpose would be to serve the public good. Like for example, very quick example, and to add to what Professor Dathavit said, one of the biggest areas today that we need to work on is waste management. We are drowning in our own waste. Cities, every cities. And when I say waste, I include even air pollution, which is a waste. So look at what happened to Delhi. And this is what happened 50 years ago or 40 years ago to Los Angeles, to various other large cities. So we are being choked and drowned by our own waste. And that is the biggest area in which our graduates have actually found wonderful opportunities also to contribute. Now, who are they contributing to? They are contributing to making the city healthy for everyone. So they are contributing to the public good. It is beyond just a job. In the same vein, I would add, anybody who is really thinking of a sustainable future has to think of working in cities. The cities are the place where the fight for sustainability will be won or lost. People, experts after experts, from the UN downwards to professors of cities and urban development, have been pointing out that most of our waste, most of our energy, most of our issues are those which are leading to climate change are in cities. Now, if you're working in any way towards making better cities, we are contributing to sustainability. And that's a larger public good. So yes, we are bridging the gap in very mundane ways, for example, by building partnerships so that both public and private can work together towards the betterment of a city. But ultimately, we are serving the public or the community good.
Okay, ma'am. Okay. So this brings up some level of clarity on what kind of sectors that an urban manager can work in. What are the potential organizations in which an urban manager can work in? But there is another concern that is there. And for anyone who decides to choose a career, you will obviously have its own set of possibilities. It has its own launching pad. So this is from where I begin. This is from how much I begin. And after 3 years, after 5 years, 10 years, this is where I reach. There is some kind of a career we can say it's some kind of a trajectory that we have. So can one of you please speak a little on the career trajectory of an urban manager? And this is with respect to pay scale also.
Well, I think let me take that question.
Okay, okay.
I, from our direct experience, I would say, you see, urban management is an emerging sector, not sector, a profession in India. There are cities are being managed, but as a profession, urban management is new. People are slowly realizing the skills that an urban manager can bring to a job and what they can offer. So initially, we have our all our graduates are always placed, as you know, we have 100% placement, but graduates go into jobs which range from working in any of the sectors that Professor Tathagat mentioned and I added to. But the primary recruiters are direct recruiters, are consultants or companies who work with government, either as in consulting ways or in setting up PMUs or in undertaking projects for the government. There are two reasons for this. One is currently the public sector or the government system does not have the capacities for managing the urban issues as they would probably like to have in the future or would build up, but currently they don't. So they, through contracting with private organizations and primarily with a lot of consultants, actually end up working in a public-private partnership kind of a way. But the students get hired by those consultants. Typically, our average has ranged between 7 to 7.75 on an average. The range being a highest of about, I think, 12 or 11.75 to 12. The interesting thing is that the trajectory of an urban manager has been very steep. While companies have been, tentative or cautious in terms of the package they commit when they take a student or a graduate, within a year or two, we've had our graduates heading verticals, heading projects, and almost at least doubling, if not tripling, their initial recruitment. Something that no regular MBA can ever dream of. A typical trajectory in terms of a salary, very mundane thing to think of, but I know that's what a graduate would think of. Everybody wants to think about the livelihood. But for a regular MBA, the rise would be what, at a 15% at best, and it takes years for you to double your salary. Now, in terms of what we have found, and that is very heartening for us, that people are quickly realizing the exceptional skills, the kind of requirements that our graduates can deliver on. And in terms of sectors, as I said, across sectors, we have specialized our focus areas in housing, water, waste management, environment, resilience, smart cities, and our graduates are now across these domains. So opportunities are opening up, and over the few years that we have been in existence, I think the response from the market has been, again, the same as a career path in some sense. It has doubled and tripled very quickly. So even with last year's slight setback in the economy, our largest batch of students never had any issues. So to that extent, I think it is really a sunrise sector in many ways.
Professor Chatterjee, there is a very interesting question here. And someone is actually asking that with the kind of multiplicity of institutions that exist in the cities, there are so many organizations, so much of overlap. in terms of the jobs and roles of agencies as such in the cities, mainly with respect to the government sector. Where do urban managers find their place in these agencies, government agencies?
Hmm. That's really a very, very interesting question. And the point is, the urban manager works for various, as Professor Kajri Mishra has already mentioned, as urban managers today work for various kind of organizations, from the smart city SPVs to the consultants. Now, one point we need to keep in mind here, that increasingly whatever major project, wherever there is a I understand that there are several organizations which are involved in running the city. There are urban local bodies, the municipalities, and the urban development authorities. Then there are smart city SPVs, and there are various other kind of domain specific bodies like metro rail corporations, etc. Now, urban managers can work in almost all of these areas, but when it comes to the issue of multiplicity of agencies, what we need to understand that now most of the work in the city are getting funded through various centrally sponsored schemes, like the Smart Cities Mission, the Amrut, the Swachh Bharat Mission, National Urban Livelihood Mission, etc. Now, and almost in all these cases, these centrally funded projects require a project management unit to assist the urban local government entities in providing the detailed project management support. So that is really the biggest area where the people with urban management background can and do contribute.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Ma'am, there is a question which you would find very interesting, because one of the participants says that there is a lot of unwanted development of cities, and we should actually have regional managers and not urban managers now. So can you tell us how these urban managers actually have a role to play even in the regional development and not just the urban development?
Thank you, Shraddha, and the participant who raised this question. I think this is a fantastic insight, and therefore the question.
Yeah.
It's interesting because that has been the vision that we have had as a country, that we cannot, and all developed countries have this also already in place, but we at least have it in our constitution that we should have both planning and management at both settlement levels, which means at all levels, including rural, small town, city, large city levels, as well as district levels. Before we think about the state, it's at the district level that you can think of it at a regional level. Another perspective on that is when you think of it from a watersheds perspective, which is because that's how our entire ecosystem actually operates. So you should think in terms of development in an ecosystemic perspective, and therefore talk about it in watershed level, which is another regional level. It could be from micro, mini watersheds to a macro watershed, which is a whole river basin. There are various kinds of regional development approaches within which both planning as well as management competencies are required. And as rightly observed, we don't have it. We don't have structures who actually take care of this in any spatial way. We do take care of it at a let's say at an individual household level in terms of poverty alleviation and other kinds of programs, health or a little bit of education programs, but we do not have any kind of a macro systemic structure that takes care of it in a special way. Nevertheless, we have in place the legislation for that. And it is only with a lot of push and with a lot of advocacy that that will probably happen. The interesting thing is, if you look at the urban and the rural, and I can bring my rural background into this also, my experience in doing this for the rural, the same kind of regional planning and the regional development or even local development is far more advanced in the rural than in the urban. None of us who lives in the urban areas would like to think it that way because we think the urban areas are more developed. Well, in terms of actually all these systemic things, the rural is far ahead currently on many factors. Hopefully, we will slowly get there in the urban domain. And once rural and urban are both on the same plane, we can think of it as regional. At the same time, even currently, an urban manager does have the scope to contribute, excuse me, in a in a regional perspective. Take the example of a very innovative transportation agency that has been set up in Odisha. Uh, that is the Capital Region Urban Transport. They could have just set it up for one city, Bhubaneswar, which is the capital. But they thought of it in a regional perspective because they could not have managed public transport sustainably within an area when a lot of the transportation needs are actually spread across the region. And in a very enlightened fashion, the Odisha government has put in place a capital region urban transportation agency, which is supposed to look at it in a regional fashion and look at human movement, mobility across the area and build a transportation system that will actually, a public transportation system that will help us reduce pollution and, car ownership and all kinds of things. So despite the fact that we may not have systemically put in place structures, it is starting to emerge. It is starting to emerge. And hopefully, with a little more awareness, a few more professionals coming into the picture, thinking of the urban, because so far the focus has been in the country on the rural, because 70%, more than 70% of the population lived there. Today, a larger proportion of the population are moving out of the rural into the urban, and therefore political and policy attention is also shifting much more to the urban. And eventually we will have to think of it in a regional perspective, and we will probably get there. One thing to add, it's interesting, we always go in cycles. In the 70s and 80s, we did have regional planning exercises and regional management exercises initiated across the country. It happened for about 5 years, 6 years, the 5-year plans took care of it, and then it died out for whatever reason. But it gives me hope that we are heading towards that, because without it, we cannot think of sustainability or a sustainable development. So
Okay, ma'am.
that's my piece on it.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Professor Chatterjee, you had spoken a little about the kind of organizations and sectors in which urban managers can work, but there are some more requests on if you can name a few such organizations where the potential recruiters of urban managers, it would be very useful for the participants.
Yes, surely. Uh, our students, the students of Xavier University's MBA Urban Management course, had been placed in various organizations. They had been placed in ENY, Ernst & Young. They had worked for IP Global. They had worked for Jones Lang LaSalle. They have worked for PwC. They have worked for GIZ, which is the German government's developmental agency. They are working for the Bhubaneswar Smart City Limited. They are working for Capital Region Urban Transport. They had done internships with XAHS, which is a international body working on the climate change area. They had worked for UN Habitat. And now some of our students are working for some of the National Institute of Urban Affairs. So the range is, the organizations where our students had worked, it's really very, very huge.
Okay, sir. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to interject here. It may be diverting a little bit, but I see something a little interesting in the chat. where somebody is mentioned, I don't know who, but has mentioned that planners can be both planners and managers, whereas urban managers cannot do planning.
I was
Very
coming right to
interesting.
that.
Okay, very interesting observation, and I'd like to speak on that for a minute, if it's okay with you, Shraddha.
Yes, ma'am, please.
Okay. Uh, I think we need to be, as professionals, a little more cautious when we are talking of our professional domains. Uh, all professions have their basis in certain theoretical and disciplinary frameworks. Planners are grounded in certain kinds of disciplines, and management as a field is grounded in other disciplines, uh, which is more operations and accounting and finance and marketing. Those are, but the basic theoretical disciplines are that it's based in an understanding of organization. Planners don't understand organizations. Planners work with communities and city systems and plan for the future. Managers manage the present. They manage with a goal to roll out a project. So there are differences both in terms of the disciplinary moorings as well as in the skills, therefore managers and planners actually should have and eventually end up having if they do a good planning or a good management course. And this has nothing to do with just urban management, I would say any MBA course. The interesting thing is nothing stops a person from learning on the job to do other kinds of things. All of us grow in our jobs. All of us learn to do other things other than what we have been educated in. But we should not confuse that. So planners can as well learn to take on some of the management jobs, and as well as managers can learn to plan. But the point, and in fact, currently, the regular business managers are doing urban managers' jobs with very little understanding of cities. They understand management, but they don't understand cities, and they don't understand the difference between running a business and running a city. But they nevertheless do it. So the point is about learning on the job and what you are basically trained in are two different things. So when you claim that as a planner, if I have a degree in planning, I can do both. Well, if you've had the experience in doing both and learning on the job, more power to you. But if you haven't, then I think it would be a little beyond the scope of planning to say that a planner is trained in both management and planning, whereas an urban manager or any manager is not trained in planning. Incidentally, an MBA also learns how to do strategic planning. But strategic planning is limited to organizations and not necessarily spatial. So similarly, planners don't understand financing, they don't understand organizations. So we should understand these competencies. It's like saying, well, a veterinary surgeon can also do surgery on a human being. Well, they understand, biological bodies, but do they really have the same competence? So, and we would not be true professionals if we are not careful about these. This is not to say that you have to lay boundaries. As I said, you can always learn.
So okay, thank you, ma'am. Professor Chatterjee, when you were describing the work of an urban manager, and when we were talking about how urban manager is involved in a lot of implementation and coordination work, there are some clarifications which are required from the participants. They want to know that with whom do they coordinate? Coordination with who all are stakeholders, basically, are they coordinating with?
Yes. That actually very much depends on which particular organization they are working for. So suppose I take a situation where an urban manager is working for a smart city SPV. So if an urban manager is working for a smart city SPV, then he or she would be coordinating with the municipal government agencies, with the development authorities, with the road PWDs, with various other utility agencies who are running the city. But at the same time, as the smart city projects in India has got a large private investment component, so they would also necessarily be negotiating with the companies who are the IT service providers, because smart cities has got a command and control center, which has got a say for example Honeywell or IBM, who are providing the software backbone. So they would be coordinating with those organizations. So if they are involved in a project with real estate development, which many smart city projects are involved in, that is a part of the area-based development, then they would be also negotiating with developers and builders. But if a person is working for a consulting firm, then it would be depending the amount of negotiations they would be doing would be depending on the type of consulting project. For example, when Bhubaneswar Smart City project was being implemented, JLL was one of the consulting organizations. So they were involved in stakeholder interfacing with different kinds of people who the entire community who are has a stake in developing the city.
Okay, sir. Okay. Since we've already exceeded the time limit by around 15-20 minutes, I would like to take just another question for Professor Mishra, and this is on what is the job profile of an urban manager? If you could just tell what a job profile of an urban manager looks like.
I think for that we have to take a survey of our graduates, because the range, but more seriously, I think the range is very large. They have been working in various kinds of profiles, but the central theme or the central set of skills that they bring is always of managing. Some have been working in the housing sector, some have been working in water and waste management, someone have been working in mobility. But ultimately, it is about either in operations or in the financing or in developing RFPs and contracts, doing demographic projections, uh, surveys, user surveys, all kinds of things. And incidentally, because it's a very fast changing and fast growing field, the profiles have also changed. So there is no typical profile except that of, I would say, of being a manager. And anybody who understands what an MBA is about would understand what a manager does. Depends on the location where you are employed, and therefore whichever sector and whichever functional specialization you are put into. Like for example, the management functional skills are, in finance or marketing or let's say project management or whatever. Whereas in terms of sectors, the urban has all the full range of sectors we've been talking about. So which combination of it that you're working on? Like some of our students, graduates who work in as district managers in the urban, in the public health system. And they are supposed to be looking after putting in place new solid waste management strategies for all towns in the district, and making sure that the people involved and the money and everything is managed. So that's one profile. On the other hand, we have people like in UN Habitat or somewhere else working on other kinds of profiles. We have somebody running the control center of our smart city, Bhubaneswar Smart City Limited. We have, so yeah, I can go on and on because they're so diverse and varied.
I think with this, we should successfully wrap up this session. There are a lot of queries with respect to what exactly does the course consist of? What are the kind of subjects which are taught in urban management? So we will be having another session, another webinar on Monday, which is 20th of April at the same time, 3:30 p.m. I would request Professor Prashant if he could share the details of that webinar on this chat. So all the participants who are interested in knowing about the course of urban management, I think it would be very useful for all of them.
Shraddha,
yes, ma'am.
Yeah, if we could just take a minute to actually say that we would anyway be, I think that's what was planned, that we would be uploading this recording on
Yes.
YouTube. So
Yes,
people who wanted to be there in the next webinar should, of course, there would be a lot more discussion on the content and courses. But if they are not able to, then we can do two things. We can respond to their questions, what they put up in chat
Sure.
after that webinar, or and also they can look at the video afterwards. These are the two things we could do. Plus, our website itself explains some of it. The one thing that possibly needs to be clarified is that there are two kinds of urban management courses. One is a regular master's in urban management, which is much more of a planning with some overlay of management courses, or a social science course with some insights into urban workings of urban areas, and an MBA, which is a full regular MBA, which is a management science course, but applied to a public systems context, to the urban context. Now that is the same as any other MBA. In fact, I would call it an MBA plus. So all the regular courses that you would have in an MBA program would be there. Plus a whole lot of courses, of course, those courses would be tweaked to make sure that they're applicable to the urban context. Plus there would be a everybody to have their questions maybe at the next webinar, because as you say, we've been going on for quite some time.
Sure.
So thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I would like to thank all the participants who have been very active in sending out their queries. I hope we have done some level of justice in answering some of your questions and queries. I would like to, of course, thank Professor Mishra and Professor Chatterjee to be here. And of course, there is one man behind this curtain who has been pulling this webinar off from conceptualization to execution is Professor Prashant Prasad. So I would like to thank him for that, and all the participants. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
Stay home, and of course, stay safe.
Thank you, Shraddha. Thank you to the participants for their time and interest.